This is Raw, a podcast by Greta Pools. Series 2 is The Nature Cure.
Today we're talking natural cures of the psychedelic kind. Mycologist Dr Alistair McTaggart is an expert in Australia's native magic mushrooms, and he joins me to discuss the unique properties of psilocybin, the hallucinogenic component of magic mushrooms. From July the 1st, 2023, the Australian government will become the first government in the world to regulate prescription of psilocybin from magic mushrooms as a medicine for people experiencing treatment-resistant depression. Under this new change, medicine containing MDMA can also be prescribed for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. Treatment will require consultation with an approved psychiatrist, and the psilocybin is taken as a pharmaceutical. But do magic mushrooms have health benefits beyond depression and trauma? Alistair is here today to discuss some of the very unique properties of hallucinogenic fungi. Hello, Al.
Hello.
What is it that makes mushrooms magic?
Oh my gosh. Mushrooms are magic in so many different ways, and fungi are magic in so many different ways. There's that fairy tale kind of magic behind things like Amanita muscaria, with hypotheses that it's linked to the invention of Santa Claus. Oh, if Santa Claus is an invention, I hate to ruin anything for anyone. You've got...
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, magic fungi in terms of their properties of bioremediation, biomaterials, foods, medicines. What else do you have? Of course, you've got hallucinogenic fungi, which I guess is the magic mushrooms that we're interested in today. And what makes them magic is 4 genes. They all have 4 genes that just turn an ordinary old amino acid, tryptophan, present in turkeys, present in all of us. They turn tryptophan into psilocybin. And then psilocybin is broken down. It loses a little part of its molecule and turns into psilocin, and it combines to our serotonin receptors to give us an experience.
So mushrooms are a very unique sort of materials. I mean, they're classified as their own kingdom. They're not plants. They're not animals. What is their life cycle? What makes them so unique?
Yeah. Well, the fungal life cycle is pretty much what I work on full time, especially sexual reproduction about fungi. And what makes fungi special is that they have a clonal part of their life cycle. So one fungus can essentially, a genotype, just like a human individual is one genotype, a mushroom can kind of keep that genotype going for long periods of time. Some fungi can make clonal spores, so they copy their genotype, and that genotype can exist forever, essentially. So they can have like this eternal kind of genotype going until something happens to it. I'm not sure what, until it runs out of resources or it fails. So you've got this ability to reproduce asexually, which is clonally. And that gives them a really strong advantage about making inoculum, which is why some fungi are really good pathogens or invasive organisms, because they can copy themselves like a photocopy and send out millions of spores to take over a new area. So fungi also reproduce sexually. And mushrooms in particular, they are kind of geared. They've got all these genetic mechanisms to stop inbreeding. So inbreeding over time causes, you can imagine, it's a bit of a Lannister situation if you watch Game of Thrones. You don't end up with blondes in mushrooms. You end up losing genetic diversity over time. So essentially, you'll have, just like a human, you have 2 copies of one allele from your parents. But if you keep crossing with yourself, you eventually lose one of those alleles over enough generations. So mushrooms and a lot of other fungi are geared to outcrossing or to stop inbreeding. And so 2 little spores meet. Most of the time, a mushroom or a fungus spends a bit of its life cycle with just one nucleus that's only got 1 copy of each chromosome. It's always easy to think back to humans. So our nuclei have 2 copies of every chromosome, one from mum, one from dad. Fungi often just have 1 copy of each chromosome. And so they'll spend a little bit of time, and their mission is to find their bud, find the thing that's going to give them the other copy of every chromosome, and then they can reproduce sexually. And so when you see fungi, it's usually because they're reproducing, whether sexually or as a clone.
So if you see a mushroom come up with its cap on the grass, that's its fruiting.
You're watching sexual reproduction in some form.
Oh, my goodness.
The production of spores, of little haploid spores, so little spores that each have one chromosome. We're probably inhaling them right now.
Why do you think that fungi, given there's many applications which you mentioned earlier, but why do you think they've also developed evolutionary this purpose of psilocybin to be able to, that has such an impact on the human mind? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, lots of thoughts, lots of hypotheses. Not my hypotheses, I should add. So there are fungi produce compounds for different reasons. So, and because we're humans, we're not microorganisms, all we can do is think about it in terms of the way that humans think about things. And the way that we think about fungi and why they produce their compounds, it's usually for sexual reproduction. I'm glad you got that out of the way. But so you might have, for example, The Last of Us with cordyceps. You'll have fungi producing compounds to take control of whatever they've infested. So cordyceps, Ophiocordyceps, the zombie ant group, they're manipulating their little host organism to do their own thing, which is to get up high so that it can produce a fruiting structure and rain spores down on their little ant buds below. So fungi produce compounds to control. They produce compounds to attract. So like a stinkhorn mushroom, if you're out in the backyard in Brisbane, minding your own business, maybe you're mowing the lawn and suddenly your olfaction is hit square in the face with a big odor of wet socks and you're like wearing pluggers or something. You might be smelling a stinkhorn mushroom and it's producing a compound to attract insects to come and get spores. So it's secreting spores in a fetid mass, and insects come, they get those spores and take them away to new locations. So fungi produce compounds to control and attract, and they produce compounds to repel. So a thing like an amatoxin, which is the toxins present in deadly mushrooms. So these toxins for humans, they're not good for us. They didn't evolve to kill us. We're not the target. We evolved much later than the fungi that produce these compounds. So humans, I think I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands years old we are, but our most recent common ancestor, the mushrooms were existing before our most recent common ancestor. So these compounds. So an amatoxin binding to our little polymerases that replicate DNA into RNA, and we no longer can produce proteins in our vital organs like a liver, and we die of organ failure. So fungi produce, this is a long rant. Fungi produce compounds to control, attract, and to repel or defend themselves. And which one is psilocybin?
Yes.
Good question. The scientific community would probably say it's as a defense mechanism. And insects, nematodes, a lot of early metazoans have serotonin receptors, which psilocybin is a serotonin agonist. So it's always targeted, probably, serotonin receptors in metazoans. Now, what was it doing to those metazoans? Some hypotheses are that it was tricking nematodes or insects into thinking they were already full. So serotonin is sometimes linked to hunger. So if you're already full and you're eating a magic mushroom and suddenly you think, I've already had dinner, I can stop eating this thing. Some might say it's to bind to serotonin receptors in fungivores, in things that eat fungi, to make them not know what's going on, So those are kind of some of the hypotheses of psilocybin.
When you say know what's going on, do you mean that sort of in a spiritual kind of sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So some theories, and people have those theories as well, like say it's fungus is sort of here to give you a vision of what life is really about. Is that what?
Oh, no. I think it's more like, while I'm eating this thing, I suddenly don't remember where I am. It's hard for us to put ourselves in the little exoskeleton of an insect, isn't it? But that's probably the target. So another metazoan, insects nematodes that have serotonin receptors and that are getting a little bit confused when they're eating a mushroom to the point that they don't want to be there anymore. But I think it's amazing that mammals are attracted. So this compound is now an attractant more than a repellent. And also you could make an argument that it's taking control of minds as well.
That's very interesting, because if it was sort of like a virus, how successful would it be to take over minds of people? Because there's so many people who are very passionate and about mushrooms, and who I know who speak to you and share information with you. So perhaps the mushroom is being very successful in sort of inspiring us to want to preserve it. And
absolutely. And I think, there's evidence. No, not like evidence in an evolutionary sense, but there's certainly evidence to show that a mushroom's taking control. You've got a community of people for the last 50 years, half a century, who have dedicated their lives to growing mushrooms under their beds, in their basements, in their attics, in bathrooms, anywhere they can away from their mothers. And this community of people have essentially cultivated magic mushrooms for so long. They've been the nucleus of an industry that's about to emerge, but they've also catalyzed all other mushroom industries by innovating new ways to grow magic mushrooms.
Yeah. So, you mentioned people have been doing this for, say, the last 50 years. So in the West, we seem to have lost some knowledge about magic mushrooms.
Yeah, we are starting to innovate with them, but there was a long period, I think, where they were so stigmatized. Right. And we intentionally didn't gain new knowledge about magic mushrooms.
Mushrooms have a very rich history in terms of our culture and literature. But in the West, we sort of haven't really understood much. It seems that we haven't really understood much about magic mushrooms since about the 1930s or the 1950s. There's an article in Life magazine by Wasson, I think it is, who seemed to bring it to public consciousness, awareness. But native cultures have been using mushrooms for a long time since. Can you sort of explain anything about that?
Yeah, I have my own thoughts, which I'm not an ethnobotanist, so I'll just clarify that right now. And yeah, what I'm saying is my own opinion. I think most Indigenous cultures have used a hallucinogenic substance of some kind, and it would be exceptional to think that an Indigenous culture didn't use a hallucinogenic substance. And the more that I've worked with Indigenous people in Australia, Indigenous scientists, Aboriginal rangers, the more I've come to be mindful of the terrible loss of knowledge that we have caused from Aboriginal people, where the knowledge is passed down totemically or through family lines or kept within women within a tribe. And when you lose individuals, you can also lose a lot of knowledge. So Australian Aboriginal people are considered the world's first chemists. They innovated our organisms, our biological organisms, for anything that they could. And I think after 70,000 years of living with a mushroom, and our native magic mushrooms will appear frequently like old friends, reappearing every April to July or after every cold snap, it would amaze me if Aboriginal people didn't use magic mushrooms at some point in time. And I think the experiences of a psilocybin trip, so connection to country, or making you feel part of everything, connectedness, it reminds me a lot of Aboriginal culture, like connection to ancestry and to country over time.
That's really amazing. And you have specialised in your career on the collecting and identifying magic mushrooms with psilocybin that are native to Australia. So can you tell us a little bit about the collection that you've put together? I believe it's the world's first collection of Australian native magic mushrooms, and what you were looking for and why that's important.
Yeah, sure. So I've worked on two species of magic mushroom in Australia. One is native and one is likely naturalized, and we'll dig into why for both of them. So our native magic mushroom, Psilocybe subaeruginosa, also called subs, or flying saucer mushrooms, grows from kind of southeast Queensland on mountain ranges. One of the triggers for it is cold weather. So it needs cold snaps to fruit. And it grows from mountaintops in Queensland all the way down to Tasmania. It grows in South Australia, and it grows in little patches in WA, in Western Australia. It also, if it's not Psilocybe subaeruginosa, a very, very similar species grows in New Zealand as well. So it's got this kind of widespread distribution. And interestingly, it grows in our very natural areas. So recently, just last weekend, I think I was down in Victoria and I collected these mushrooms in a national park in the Victorian Alps. So it was just so fascinating to see them in the wild.
So that's the mushroom that I believe is somehow or other, you believe it's native to Australia and there's records and it's endemic in terms of where it grows, you just were mentioning.
Yeah.
But there is a strong history of that mushroom in the Northern Hemisphere as well. So you can talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So this mushroom, Psilocybe subaeruginosa, colonizes wood chips. It's also called a wood lover. So you've got this group of magic mushrooms called wood lovers. And you can imagine that if soil gets moved, and this has happened time and again all throughout the history with microorganisms of humans moving things around. If someone takes a bucket of soil that has Psilocybe subaeruginosa growing in it, maybe it's connected to a plant that they've moved to a botanic gardens, like Kew Botanic Gardens, and they've planted a tree there and taken that mushroom by accident along with them. That mushroom will have been introduced as a clone, as its little mycelia, and it kind of infiltrates a botanic gardens and gradually produces more and more spores. And so what you see about our Australian mushroom that's infiltrated the Northern Hemisphere is that this mushroom doesn't grow in their natural areas. It grows in cultivated garden beds. It has really low genetic diversity, which is indicative of an invasive organism. So this mushroom in the Northern Hemisphere is called Psilocybe cyanescens. It occurs in Europe. It occurs in the west coast of the United States of America. And it really became a go-to mushroom for recreational use and to kind of start increasing knowledge of psilocybin use. So it's also been described, I think our mushroom has probably invaded the Northern Hemisphere more than once. And so you'll have these mushrooms in the Northern Hemisphere that might look a little bit different. They'll have a phenotypic difference, maybe a wavy cap or a conical cap. And that's just because they might have been introduced in Australia. We've got the most genetic and therefore phenotypic diversity, and small amounts of genetic diversity have been introduced to the Northern Hemisphere. So you have fewer characters, or maybe one character will become fixed, like a wavy cap, which is kind of how new species have been described in the Northern Hemisphere. So there's Psilocybe cyanescens, Psilocybe allenii, Psilocybe azurescens that are all suspiciously very similar to Psilocybe subaeruginosa.
So Australian magic mushrooms, our native ones, have a lot to offer in terms of their psilocybin and what they might be able to be used for in therapeutics and medicines. Is that part of what you were trying to do with your collection, to be able to identify unique traits that might have some benefit?
Well, I originally started the collection to test the hypothesis that Australia was the centre of origin, but I've kind of come on an adventure along the way. So Psilocybe subaeruginosa is a mushroom that has a really high concentration of psilocybin, but it's not suitable for commercial use because of another compound it produces. We don't know what the compound is, but it has quite the side effect. It's called wood lovers paralysis.
Yes, I heard this story. I think you mentioned this once to me.
I'm going to borrow a story from a friend of mine who I met from Entheogenesis australis. His name's Billy. When Billy was a young kid, he was showing his friend how to collect magic mushrooms and what to do. And they'd eaten a few mushrooms. This is in Victoria, somewhere in rural Victoria. They'd collected them from the wild. And Billy and his friend had eaten some, and then they decided to walk down to get a kebab from the local kebabery. And at the bottom of Billy's driveway, or somewhere near Billy's driveway, he said to his friend, "I'm not feeling so good. I might head back up to the house." And Billy's friend continued to get his delicious kebab. And Billy turned around. He made it to his driveway, but then he lost all function of his muscles. And he fell face forward into his driveway.
Instantly?
Yeah. Yeah, he just collapsed and he lay like a little millipede, a little kind of frozen worm on his driveway, face down. He couldn't even wiggle his fingertips to move himself off his driveway. And so possibly he was also experiencing the effects of psilocybin. He might have had a warped concept of space and time. So poor Billy could have been paralyzed for what felt like an eternity on his driveway. And his friend came and dragged him inside. And apparently about after an hour to an hour and a half of Billy being fully paralyzed, he started to regain movement. He was able to speak again and tell his friend he was okay.
Wow.
So wood lovers paralysis, the cause of which is unknown. Maybe later today we can talk about some of my hypotheses, and then there's the community also has their own hypotheses about the cause.
Let's talk about them now, because one of the things that you've are interested in your research is that, yes, magic mushrooms in trials have been having benefit for depression and trauma conditions, but you think that there might be a whole range of applications available, and this paralysis is an example. So let's talk about some of the theories.
For sure. Okay, well, I'll just say that fungi and mushrooms produce all sorts of secondary metabolites, and we've barely scratched the surface of the knowledge of those metabolites. So back to wood lovers paralysis, humans have up to 14 or more serotonin receptors. Some of those serotonin receptors occur in our peripheral nervous system, and that peripheral serotonin receptor is responsible for the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, so involuntary movement. Imagine, this is my hypothesis, and I'm always prepared to be wrong with everything that I hypothesize in science.
A true scientist.
So if there's, along the way to produce psilocybin, I think I spoke about those 4 genes earlier. When tryptophan becomes psilocybin, you have analogs produced that are still psychedelic. You have tryptamine, 4-hydroxytryptamine produced, and fungi may innovate different things onto those compounds that will have different effects. They'll still be able to bind to serotonin receptors, potentially, as long as they don't have a little phosphate group attached to them. So if you've got something that's binding with a high affinity to peripheral serotonin receptors, maybe that's causing a paralysis. So maybe it's something from a fungus that could cure Parkinson's disease in the future, or be used by an anaesthetist to help stop a person moving while they're in surgery. Who knows? It's something that I would like to test. I have isolates that I think will be candidates because they have different copies of genes that produce 4-hydroxytryptamine. So one of those genes in the pathways. And possibly the hypothesis we'll test is that they're producing a different tryptamine that may be combined to a different serotonin receptor. It should be interesting.
Wow. So is that something, a quality that people have known about before, or is that something that people are only really identifying now, that paralysis, the woody paralysis?
To borrow from Billy, again, thank you, Billy, when he was telling me about wood lovers paralysis, and I should say a lot of people told me about their experiences, and it's so fascinating to hear about them. When that first happened to Billy, it was the early thousands, so around the year 2000, and he was desperately trying to work out what had happened. And because back then magic mushrooms also still had that massive stigma associated with them as well, and the community wasn't talking. So since then, There's been the founding of Entheogenesis Australis and other online fora where people can talk about the use of psychedelics, which is just so refreshing in an open forum and still stay anonymous. We'll see what happens to the stigma over time. But Billy said that there was nothing, that he couldn't really identify anyone else in the community that had experienced it. And it's possible, when I spoke to one person from Tasmania, they said the first time they ever tried magic mushrooms, they must have been paralyzed. And that's what they thought a good mushroom experience was being paralyzed. Like, whoa, this has just happened. So I think it's been going on, but not spoken about. And now the community in entheogenesis is uncovering a lot more knowledge about what's kind of the drivers behind it and how kind of the percentage of the community that has experienced wood lovers paralysis.
Now, I know you're an evolutionary biologist and you're not, or a mycologist, but you're not a health professional. But how is it that magic mushrooms help people with depression or trauma?
Oh,
What's the process? How does it help people?
Gosh, I'm not sure, Margaret. Good question. I mean, binding to serotonin receptors, certainly. And then I think it makes your brain more plastic or neurons more plastic so that you're fresher. I think there's new light being shed on this all the time. But from what I understand, it is about plasticity and that you're more open to change. And you can be talked through, especially in assisted therapy, you can be talked through a trauma or whatever is troubling you.
That's great. And so what sort of characteristics have you found with Australian mushrooms? What's your research identified so far?
So for our Australian mushrooms, 100% that they're endemic to Australia and that the things in the Northern Hemisphere had an origin in Australia. Because we're the center of origin, we have the most genetic diversity. So we have diversity at the psilocybin locus. We'll have a lot of things to play around with. If we could resolve wood lovers paralysis and say you have to have this gene in the mushroom for it to cause paralysis, then we could immediately just start screening mushrooms that didn't have it.
Yeah.
And be able to use them clinically. Or maybe we could target the ones that do have wood lovers paralysis and say, well, if you want to be paralyzed in your psilocybin experience, then try these. So maybe it shouldn't be even thought of as a bad thing.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, gosh.
People will say that they've had some sort of experience where they've seen beyond themselves, perhaps. Do you think that helps just with their mindset? Those sort of visions, or do you have any sort of comment on that side of things? Or
yeah, I've heard that they're ego reducing, so it can help put everything into perspective.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the best things about them, and maybe what you're kind of referring to.
Probably is that ayahuasca and all those things. That's similar. Well, maybe the experiences are different, but they are that ego reducing, and they give you an insight, or if you have a good trip, presumably.
Yeah, I think creativity, in terms of creativity, yes, and in insights into possibly your past experiences. Yep. I believe that psilocybin is very useful.
But you've found examples of people who have had an experience with magic mushrooms, but they haven't known what they've been eating or what their experience was. Can you tell us a little bit of some of those stories?
Yeah, sure. So prior to Western knowledge, which is in the 50s, and I should clarify, I didn't find this. I just read about it. I'm just the middleman to you all at the moment. It's in a paper by John Allen, who, incidentally, when I was mentioning other mushrooms, psilocybe allenii is named after John Allen. So a real psilocybe
that was Brisbane
aficionado.
Collector, was it? Or?
No, I think he's from the United States. But he did travel the world, I think, looking at psilocybin mushrooms.
Another captured one.
So in one of Allen's papers, he documents all the anecdotal reports of accidental magic mushroom use in Australia, and in southeast Queensland is the hotspot. So a mushroom that we haven't spoken about at all today, Psilocybe cubensis, which we call here in southeast Queensland a gold top that grows in cow farms, has been responsible for many accidental ingestions. One of my favourite ones is you'll read about the people, a family went on a picnic and they somewhere in the Gold Coast hinterland, and they ate some field mushrooms and some soft cheese or whatever else on their checkered blanket. And they all had this shared vision of flashing lights, and they decided, well, something's not right here. There was a lot of hilarity, and they checked themselves into hospital, and the father of this otherwise church-abiding kind of family started to do things that he was not known for doing. I believe it involved nudity and possibly what we would consider sexual assault, but it's hard to read into these small little snippets. The one that is most interesting to me is in the 40s, a veteran who'd returned probably from World War II, in an area of Queensland called Delaney's Creek near Woodford. And he had a mushroom experience, and he went to the hospital and said something funny happened to me. And then I think, although we can't ask him, I think he went back a second time to try those mushrooms again. And it must have been terrifying because there was no knowledge in Australia about hallucinogenic mushrooms. So none of these people were expecting whatever happened to them. Then in about the 70s, when the impact of psilocybin was a bit better understood, then you start having all the stories of the surfers starting to use mushrooms around the Gold Coast. So Talabudra in particular. I love reading the anecdotes from the UK scientists who came to Australia, to Brisbane, and Brisbane was just covered in magic mushrooms because we had a lot more cows back in the 70s.
So where are the mushrooms? So that's an imported one. Is it the cubensis, the golden top?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So it's so cool that you know that. So there's two hypotheses for how it could be here. Either that it has a center of origin here or that it's introduced. And so Australian mycologists have hypothesized that anything that grows out of bovine manure or horse dung is probably introduced. The alternative hypothesis is that they were growing out of those big macrofauna, big massive marsupials like diprotodons and whatnot and cubes. Psilocybe cubensis were growing out of that manure. But I ended up making quite a decent collection of Psilocybe cubensis from northern Queensland way down to New South Wales. And it's pretty obvious from the work that we've done and combined with knowledge of cultivated lines of Psilocybe cubensis that it's introduced to Australia and naturalized. What's really special about our population is that it's been here so long, possibly 200 years. And we know that it's been introduced because it had a really sharp bottleneck in its effective population size, which is just a measure of how many clones or how many genotypes are present in Australia. Now, when you look at the population, it's bounced back, and that's just because it's been outbreeding and making new genotypic diversity from a small founding population. So we've got more genetic diversity, say, in one paddock in southeast Queensland than in the entire cultivated population of Psilocybe cubensis in the northern hemisphere. So that's really special. So the cultivated population in the northern hemisphere has been forced to inbreed. So they keep crossing them with each other. It's all they've got because people have been sharing mycelia, or they take a spore print of one mushroom and then cross it with spores from that same mushroom. And so over time, when we're talking about inbreeding, you start to lose diversity through inbreeding. So our Australian population is really special, and it will probably end up supplementing genetic diversity into cultivated lines of Psilocybe cubensis.
So we've got this diversity. Do some mushrooms or some psilocybin producing mushrooms give you a different experience, hallucinogenic experience to others?
Oh, wow. Yeah, another fantastic question and unsettled within the wider community. So I'll just give you some facts. We've sort of already heard them before. We have 14 or more serotonin receptors, and on the route from tryptophan to psilocybin, we have analogues of psilocybin produced that may or may not bind with different affinities to different serotonin receptors. So if you've got a whole lot of tryptamines and are produced through genetic diversity, so maybe in some mushrooms you might have more of one of those analogues produced relative to psilocin or relative to psilocybin, and they're binding to different receptors in your body, you could potentially imagine that you might have a different experience. So the popular, I think, hypothesis is that set and setting set a psilocybin experience. And then psilocybin, it turns into psilocin, it binds to your, 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. And that's just what happens. But imagine if you've got all these other psilocybin receptors and you have other serotonin receptors and other tryptamines. Maybe there's an orchestra, this kind of synergistic effect or an entourage effect is what the cannabis community call it, that possibly could also impact your experience. So, but it's totally debated. And most chemists will say, no, it's psilocin binding to 5-HT2A, and that's that. Anything else is in your head.
Interesting. I'd like to talk a little bit about the change in law here in Australia, which is the first place in the world where magic mushrooms or psilocybin will be prescribed for therapeutics. But before we get onto that, I'm just wondering if you can just sort of differentiate what LSD is to magic mushrooms, just to give that different explanation of what those two compounds are.
Yeah, so LSD, lysergic acid, is also derived from fungi. Magic mushrooms are Basidiomycota. There are two massive groups that we see of mushrooms, Ascomycota and Basidiomycota. Mushrooms are all Basidiomycota. In Ascomycota, there's even more diversity than mushrooms and even more compounds produced by them. And so LSD is derived from a fungus called claviceps. It produces it's a plant pathogen, which is what my background is in.
Yes.
I'm a plant pathologist by training. Ergot is this a fungus. It infects the inflorescences of grasses. So lots and lots of different ergots all through Australia in particular. We've got a lot of native ergots on our native grasses. It became big because it was on ryegrass. So in Europe, and poor people were eating rye instead of wheat, and they were grinding up. What will happen with claviceps is it produces something called a sclerote. You could think of it as a almost like a little woody piece of tissue inside a grass ovary where the grain would normally be. And that gets ground up with all the other grains. The problem is that inside that little woody piece of fungal tissue is a whole lot of alkaloids. And one of them is the precursor to lysergic acid, to LSD. So the people who originally had ergotism were tripping on this similar LSD experience.
A fungus on their rye.
Yeah. But they also had the side effects of that wasn't pure LSD. It had other terrible things. So when cows eat a lot of ergot, they'll get staggers, something called staggers. They turn blind. So they're hallucinating, and you end up also having gangrene. So it's a very unpleasant way to go.
Yeah.
Albert Hofmann, when he purified LSD, lysergic acid, from starting culture of claviceps, then that was
in the 1930s, was it?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. You might have to double check. Albert Hofmann. Oh, I can't remember.
We were going to move on to talk about how the new system of magic mushroom therapeutics coming into Australia, how is that going to impact people's attitudes to magic mushrooms, do you think? And what future are there for the sort of therapeutics that you're looking at? You mentioned about the paralysis. There might be some sort of compound that could be used to help people with Parkinson's or other movements like that. So we've got that new system coming into place, and just wondering what you think that's going to mean for the magic mushroom industry.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer your first question, I think, which is that what is the impact of the law changes come the 1st of July? I think it means that there's going to be a change in the stigma. I think as medicines become accepted, it means that the stigmatization of a compound over time will fade, and maybe people will start to see it as a legitimate medicine. I think on the 1st of July, it's really unlikely that you'll just be able to waltz up and get a prescription very easily. In fact, I'm really interested to see how this all unfolds. I know when I talk to psilocybin growers, they want to produce psilocybin cheaply and make it available to people. They're often in it because they want to help spread psilocybin to more and more people. But what will happen, I think, in Australia is that you'll have to have psychiatric assisted therapy, and that's paying for someone's time to sit with you through an experience. And so you'll have to, I think it will be unaffordable at the start and not really available to many people. So you have to have that recalcitrant treatment-resistant depression to qualify. And then we'll see how the industry, and I'm speaking specifically of the psychiatric industry, how they kind of develop a framework to treat patients and how they triage people who are going to receive psilocybin.
Well, now that psilocybin has sort of gained that credibility, it's going to be used it's going to become an official medicine. What are the potential other uses that it may be co-opted for?
Yeah. Okay. I think I'll just clarify one thing. So it hasn't gained credibility yet. And this is why a part of the psychiatric community are really concerned, because they think that the science hasn't kept up with the hype. So there's still a large percentage of I don't know actually the size of the community who think it's too soon. So a lot of people think it's too soon to be using it as a medicine, even though they usually see the benefit of psilocybin. They're not sure.
Do the community is psilocybin available as a tablet now, or is it just people are having that from mushroom form, like eating mushrooms?
So all of the clinical trials to date have used synthetic psilocybin, so something that's not extracted from a mushroom. So there's several ways you can produce psilocybin. You can produce it synthetically, which I think is from tryptophan, and they will modify it in different ways. You can produce it biosynthetically using a yeast like Saccharomyces cerevisiae, brewing yeast, and you put those 4 genes plus a couple of others into a yeast, and that yeast then starts producing psilocybin. And then it just puts it into a vacuole, and you can extract it from a tiny single-celled fungus, or you can grow a mushroom and produce psilocybin. And I think that's probably, I don't know, that might be what people prefer to use. It's so hard to know how, what will happen. I don't think you'll kind of rock up to the pharmacy and get your specific dose of one mushroom in the clinical kind of space. But who knows, maybe it will follow a cannabis trajectory where you will be able to start to kind of have a recreational use for it as well. Who knows? Who knows?
I'm interested in how your career path, how you came to be captured by the psilocybin mushrooms. Well, I mean, just how you came to this position where you're researching magic mushrooms. Tell us a little bit about the things that interested you and led you on to this career.
Sure. I've only worked on magic mushrooms for 2 years now, and I should say it's the most strategic I've ever been in my life. Up until, so I did uni, I was working on humans, and I did education. I became a teacher. I was
science
a high school teacher. Yeah, science and maths here in Brisbane and Ipswich, actually. And that was eye-opening. It's so great to be a teacher and to learn how to communicate with people. And also, it helps you be mindful of different backgrounds of people. Then I started working on plants because I really just loved plants. I just wanted to get paid to identify plants, which now I know is a unicorn. That's for very few people in the world. And I fell into plant pathology. And my mentor in plant pathology took me to the Kimberley in Australia, in Western Australia, and I was working on grasses. I was working on something called smut fungi, which also infects. They're similar to claviceps. They infect the inflorescence of a grass. And so I really I had a lot of good mentorship and a lot of opportunities to travel and just to collect fungi in the wild. And so I did a PhD on smut fungi. And then I went to America, and this is totally just the path of least resistance. There was no strategic thinking. If I could go and tell a younger Alistair to be strategic, I definitely would. But I was just having a good time. And I went to the States where I studied under somebody who I really admired and learnt about a new group of fungi. I came back to Australia, and then I went to South Africa with my girlfriend, and we were working on forestry diseases, on some of the fungi that I'd worked on in the past. Came back to Australia again. And then this time I was on a fellowship, and a fellowship gives you lots of freedom to do whatever you want. And COVID happened, and I needed a change from plant pathology. And I thought, well, what can I do? I'm a fungal geneticist, but how can I apply these skills? It feels like such a waste if I just go work at Bunnings as a man in the garden centre. How can I apply my fungal genetics knowledge? And that's when I decided to work on shrooms. And from there, it's just been a breath of fresh air and the most fun I've ever had in research.
That's amazing. And you've really tapped into the community as well, that community of magic mushroom collectors and aficionados that exists in Australia and globally as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that community? They seem very passionate people.
Yeah. Oh, they're just the best. It's amazing now. So back when I first started, I think I was someone with a skill set to answer questions that had been existing in a community for a long time. And so they kind of were like, hey, who is this guy? Who is he? And some of them started to help me. And it's just been fantastic because the people who have the same questions as me, but maybe not the means to answer them, have been sending me material. And I received more than 250 spore prints in 2022, which is a lot of people just going out and collecting mushrooms. All of my work is totally unfunded. For the last 2 years, I was lucky enough to have a fellowship for one of those years on magic mushrooms. But then I had a 5-month contract, and now I work part-time. I get paid for 2 days a week. And there's absolutely no money associated with the project itself. So it's all trying to do expensive things on the cheap, and collecting is so expensive. So without the help of the wider community, what we've accomplished would be impossible without such a willing group of people.
And so people get in touch with you, but when you travel around, are you meeting people like Billy, for example? It's really sort of important information that you're getting hold of through the community. Yeah.
Oh, it's so nice to meet all the people who've been collecting on my behalf as well. So I go to things like entheogenesis. This group in Australia who are they try and help reduce harm if people want to use psychedelics. So they're a necessary group, and a lot of knowledge underpins, so you've got a lot of experience of using psychedelics in that group that can really just help others. And it was also kind of the kindling to start other psychedelic societies like PRISM. So that kind of blossomed from entheogenesis. So it's been just wonderful to join the community.
And what sort of is the future for therapeutics? So some people, myself for example, might prefer to have a natural to be able to try psilocybin through a natural mushroom, I understand there's lots of risks when you don't know what you're collecting and all that sort of stuff, which I'm sure you would emphasize to anyone. But otherwise, we're going to get it as a pill. But are there other ways that we might be able to ingest this sort of medicine?
Well, let's go back to your first little point there. Finding magic mushrooms is pretty easy, really, if you've got the volition. So in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, from northern Queensland even, if you know someone with a cow farm, there's a pretty good chance there's a magic mushroom somewhere growing on it, especially if it's been raining. And I'm talking from cans from the Daintree, I've collected them in September, but down here near Brisbane, they kind of start fruiting in around October, and they'll still be fruiting till the end of May. So depending on rainfall, and they're really easy to identify. These are fungi that grow in manure. They'll stain blue. They have gills. Psilocybe, which is the genus that I specifically work on, have a purple spore print. But then you've got another hallucinogenic genus, which is called Paniolus. And I shouldn't say it's a hallucinogenic genus by any means. What happened in the evolution of psilocybin, those 4 genes that produce psilocybin at some point in time were transferred to species of Paniolus, just a handful of them. So a handful of these things called Paniolus, which colloquially are called blue meanies, are also magic mushrooms. So back to kind of when we were talking about a difference between mushroom experiences, somebody who's eating a psilocybe, a cube or a sub.
Golden top.
Yeah. There's someone who's eating a blue meanie, a species of Paniolus. I'm sure that they just think while they're experiencing it, wow, well, my Paniolus is the product of horizontal gene transfer. It got the psilocybin pathway easily. It got it it just picked it up like someone picking up luggage off the carousel at the airport, whereas psilocybe evolved it in a most recent common ancestor. And so nearly every species of psilocybe produces psilocybin. So it did it the hard way. It put in the work. Paniolus just got it.
So you're saying that just because it was located near the psilocybe mushroom, that the gene has transferred across to it?
Yeah. So it's happened many times in the fungal kingdom, a horizontal gene transfer. Usually it's of a secondary metabolite cluster. So things that are producing a compound like psilocybin, amatoxins have been transferred. Just last year, it was shown that compound that's toxic to humans was transferred probably from Amanita to other mushrooms that became poisonous, even though when you eat other mushrooms from that genus, they aren't poisonous. So it was most likely picked up horizontally. But I've just segued because I was telling you about how to identify a magic mushroom. Yeah. If you live in Queensland, then cow manure is your pick.
Yeah.
But south of here, so when you start to get nighttime temperatures below 6 degrees, probably consistently, you'll be in subaruginosa country, Psilocybe subaruginosa, and you should be looking in wood chips. You could go out into a sclerophyll forest or any natural environment and do your research about how they look and check every single mushroom if you are picking them to eat, because there are lookalikes. And just from what we've spoken about, one of those lookalikes happens to have picked up horizontally the pathway to produce amatoxins. So there are lookalikes that can kill you.
Yep. So you do have to be very, very careful. But I suppose the community is ingesting those mushrooms in that form. And through the medical side of things, we're going to have a tablet that will be regulated.
Yeah.
And is that the future for?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure what the future is. I don't know how people will do it. Probably a tablet is going to be the way. But who knows? People are innovating ways to take drugs. So I expect we'll see some creative new ways to ingest psilocybin in the future.
Where do magic mushrooms grow in Australia? Are they spread throughout the full north and south?
Oh, Margaret, it feels like a really good excuse to talk about the mushroom that you helped me share with the world.
The lost magic mushroom of Kakadu.
That's the one. Way back, I think it was was it last year or 2 years ago?
2022.
Yeah. I was just looking in the soil sequencing data because I thought that our naturalized magic mushroom, Psilocybe cubensis, cubes, were going to be everywhere. I've actually started to understand this better, so I'll come back to that. But while I was looking for cubes, we found other species of psilocybe, and they occur all over Australia in our soils. This is based on microbial sequencing, so just tiny little pieces of DNA, but that we can be 100% certain come from psilocybe, so come from a magic mushroom. And there was a sequence that occurred in Kakadu National Park and Litchfield National Park that was unlike anything that had ever been sequenced. And when I say sequenced, what's interesting about magic mushrooms is because they're so charismatic and people collect them, they sequence them regularly. And by sequencing, I just mean a tiny piece of their DNA is they find out what that DNA is, and then they put it onto a database, on a publicly available database. So you can almost think of any psilocybe and see if its sequence is available publicly. And so when we found this mushroom in Kakadu and Litchfield, sorry, I shouldn't say we found a mushroom. We found a sequence of a mushroom in Kakadu and Litchfield. It was like nothing comparable that had ever been sequenced of psilocybe. So it's a really...
Anywhere in the world.
Yeah. So it's a really good indication that it could be an unknown species to science. Not saying that it hasn't been seen before, but in terms of taxonomy, it might be something that warrants a new taxonomic name. Now, what was it that crossed my mind? Oh, the way that cubes grow. So this is a little bit more genetics. So since I've kind of worked on this project, when I was looking for cubes in the soil, I now realize how foolish and naive I was. I believe that what happens with Psilocybe cubensis, I think it will, when it grows out of manure, it's showering all the neighboring grass in its little spores. You know, millions and millions of spores coming from one mushroom. They're hoovered up by a cow when it's grazing on grass. It passes through a tract, through a cow, and comes out in a fresh piece of manure. And there it's got a carbon and nitrogen rich environment where it can colonize it and then fruit a new mushroom. Now, when that manure is gone, the mycelium is gone. So Psilocybe cubensis is comparable to an annual plant. So like a daisy that appears for a season and then spreads its seeds and disappears. So it's short-lived and it's got ephemeral kind of genotypes. Whereas Psilocybe subaeruginosa, our native Australian mushroom, this colonizes wood chips and it is persistent over time. So it colonizes and it will be there all the time. When you go back to a patch of Psilocybe subaeruginosa year after year, you're visiting the same genotype. So it is like visiting an old friend. So yeah, it's they're there forever.
Wow. It's a fascinating story and fascinating research as well, Alistair. What are you doing now?
Well, I work 2 days a week for UQ, which keeps me off the streets. And then in the future, I hopefully will start a new position at a company called Funky Fungus, who are going to start producing psilocybin. And hopefully I'll get to continue what I've been doing, which is breeding magic mushrooms.
Alistair, that sounds amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wish you every success.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Raw is a podcast by Greta Pools. Subscribe to Raw, the Nature Cure, where you get your podcasts. Or visit the website, all one word, rawthepodcast.com.